Start now. Welcome to Corporate Resources.
Chair, sorry, I'm just going to start the recording. Bear with me. Right, recording has started, Chair.
Okay, welcome to, yes, I got it now. Welcome to Corporate Resources meeting. Before we make a start, okay, Mark Thomas, who's our Democratic Officer, who's deputising for Karen, is going to do some housekeeping. So over to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, committee. Just before the meeting starts proper, I'm just going to do some housekeeping rules. Just to remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording is archived for future viewing. Also, could all participants mute themselves, please, when not speaking, in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If a member wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up, or if they can be seen on screen, or use the raise hand option on Teams. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function, however, may be used to highlight any technical issues to the chairman or Democratic Services Officer. Can all other attendees, for example, officers and members of the public, please turn off their cameras and mute themselves until called on to speak by the chair.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to add one last thing very quickly. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they're addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman or Democratic Officer know. If they have a webcam, then could they try turning this off, as this will help with broadband or Wi-Fi, so at least they can hear and be heard. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, committee.
Thank you very much. Okay, just moving now to the agenda. First of all, apologies for absence. I've got Councillor Cox. Is there anyone else? Mark? No, no one else. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on the 17th November. Okay, I got Councillor Ruba Savignano. Do you want to say something, Ruba?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was really just to make a correction, because I feel like I wasn't quite reported quite correctly.
Okay.
So at page, in my papers, it's page 508, but it's about the Welsh language strategy, and it's really at the paragraph that starts with Councillor Savignano echoed the importance of consulting with communities who requested that further information and perspectives of English-speaking families who'd moved into the area and who'd placed children in Welsh medium schools should be reflected in the work. But specifically, I think I did mention that. But more importantly, from my point of view, I was specifically talking about self-selection, and perhaps I wasn't as clear as I ought to have been. But when I talked about self-selection, I was talking about Welsh medium schools acting as a middle-class filter, really, so that I was really interested in the statistics around, around the people that were accessing Welsh medium schools, specifically around diversity, so socioeconomic, their socioeconomic position, and also their, whether they were from BME communities. So that was really specific, and perhaps it was my fault that I didn't elaborate on that specifically. But I would be interested. I think it was David Thomas, isn't it? If he could get statistics for us around, that specific area. Does that make sense?
Okay, so
I did talk about support, but I also specifically talked about self-selection, and in that I may not have been clear enough, because what I really wanted to know was, that middle class families had, specifically had more access to support to face the challenges of specifically Welsh medium schools, particularly if they were English speaking, and I wanted to know whether that was reflected in the statistics of people accessing Welsh medium schools in the Vale.
Okay, so if you want that point added to the minutes, are we happy to do that, committee? Yeah, fine. Okay, that's fine. That's all right. Thank you very much. We'll add that point to the minutes. Apart from that alteration, are we all happy with the minutes? Yeah, great. Okay, move to declarations of interest. Anyone got any declarations of interest here? No. Okay, now what I've done now as chair, I use my prerogative as chair to have an additional item on this because I regard on item 12, but I'm going to move that up to now item number 4. And that is why we got Rob Thomas and Mr. Tom Porter from Public Health Wales to discuss COVID and our response. So, Rob, do you want to introduce Tom? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you also for your request for this urgent update on COVID, and also, I guess, what's particularly relevant at the moment is how the spread of the Omicron variant is impacting on the Council as an organisation and also more generally Wales as a country. So it's clear from today's announcement by the First Minister and the various announcements over the last few days, early part of this week, the end of last week, that the Omicron wave is growing and rates are spreading rapidly. I think it appears that Omicron is a far more transmissible variant, and Omicron is also set to become the dominant strain in Wales in probably a very short time scale. I was on a call this morning with Welsh Government, as was the leader, and with other chief executives and leaders across Wales. And what's apparent from the reports back this morning is that we've seen a dramatic increase in Wales in the last day or so, and Omicron is now, there are over 450, I think, cases in Wales. That was mentioned this morning. The other frightening fact that was referenced this morning is we're about 2.5 weeks behind the situation in London. So I guess the stark message is that it is coming our way, and it is coming very, very quickly. That's it probably as a scene-setting exercise. Sincere apologies that I can't be any more uplifting than that. But I guess what we need in situations like this is probably honesty and honest reflection as to the position that we find ourselves in. So pleased that Tom Porter has been able to join us this afternoon, and I'm grateful to Tom for joining us at very short notice. Tom works within the Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, worked really closely with us and with colleagues from the council across the Cardiff and Vale UHB area over the last 18 months or so, and is a regular attender to the various meetings that we hold on a weekly basis. They moved to fortnightly briefly, they're back again to weekly meetings, and Tom gives us his analysis at those meetings as to how the variant is impacting on our communities and how it's spreading. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Tom, who can give you a far more detailed picture of the current position than what I would be able to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Tom.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Chair. Afternoon, everyone. If I just share my screen, hopefully you'll be able to see this. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just go through some of the stats quickly, and then just a little bit more detail about Omicron. I'm sure a lot of people are aware of a lot of this, but I think it's important just to lay it all out, as Rob said, transparently, just so that everyone is aware of our current position. Then I'm happy to take any questions afterwards as well. So this shows our local case rate. So because we cover the Cardiff area as well, this shows both areas. So in green in the Vale, you can see over the last few weeks that our rate had been fairly stable, if actually declining a little bit. So going into the beginning of December, before Omicron appeared, we had quite a stable position and things were looking good. But since Omicron has appeared, you can see that rates have started to take off quite dramatically. And if you look then by age group, if you break it down by age group, you can see that a lot of that takeoff is in the kind of working age and young adult population. And in fact, if you break that down further, it's not shown here, but it's 20 to 29-year-olds in particular. It's really skyrocketing, and to a slightly lesser extent, 30 to 39-year-olds as well. That's where we're seeing the biggest takeoff. One of the bits that's concerning to me is this pink line here is the 60s and over, and they're the group which are more vulnerable to getting severe complications from COVID. And that had been declining nicely, and that was with the booster dose in particular that helped show that decline with the Delta variant. But as you can see, in the last few days since Omicron has reared its head, that started to go up again. Now the question really is, what's that going to do in terms of translating through to hospitalizations and severe illness? So that's the thing we really need to keep an eye on. This is kind of baked in. We know that it's going to spread fast, especially within younger adult age groups. It's what happens in this age group that's of particular concern. So if we look at our hospital admissions as well, so this is for Cardiff and Vale area, and this graph goes back to the second wave. So that's the peak over Christmas last year, and you can see really quite high hospital admissions involving COVID then, very quiet over the summer, very gradually increasing, and actually it had been improving over the last few weeks, as I said, and we've not yet seen any impact of that increase in case rates through to the hospital figures as we speak, and we would expect that to take anywhere between a week and 2 weeks. So it may be a little bit early for us to be seeing that impact in our area at the moment. Just to complete the picture, I suppose, we do, as everyone knows, sadly see deaths from COVID. They've been relatively low over the last few months. There has been an ever so slight increase prior to Omicron coming along anyway, still much lower than we saw in the second wave last Christmas or in the first wave. And that is something, again, we're going to keep an eye on to make sure that trend doesn't persist and get higher. But as things stand, nowhere near what we were seeing in the first two waves. So this is what the official figures show for Omicron. So you'll have seen that the figures have been published daily for the last few days in Wales, showing how many cases we've had. And these are the figures for Cardiff and Vale specifically. And you can see that unfortunate exponential curve there. And those were getting up to, that's the total cumulative ones that have been published. And there may have been some figures out in the last few minutes, but this was to the end of yesterday. So around 150 cases. But what that doesn't tell us, although we are doing assays and sequencing on a large number of samples where we've suspected Omicron, particularly initially in people who are returning travellers or linked to that, actually it's much more widespread. And if we do an assay which can be done more quickly on a wider set of samples, so people may have heard of this, it's the S gene target failure, or SGTF. It does seem to be a good proxy for Omicron, and it looks like in our area in Cardiff and Vale, over 80% of cases now have that SGTF, so are very likely to be Omicron. So we know that is now the dominant variant in Cardiff and Vale. And if you look at a map of Wales, it does look like, although it is spreading across Wales, we are kind of the hotspot area at the moment. It will spread very quickly everywhere, but certainly we're one of the earliest parts of Wales to see that sharp rise. So the general trends have, as I say, been generally good amongst older people, with cases falling, but there are some early signs that's starting to rise again. Generally, hospital admissions and occupancy have been good. Again, we need to keep an eye on that. And I've mentioned about mortality as well. It's really important to say that a lot of the cases that we're picking up in those case figures I showed right at the beginning are people who are picking these up on lateral flow tests. So they're often asymptomatic, or they have no or very few symptoms at all. So these cases aren't necessarily, just seeing the case rate alone isn't necessarily doom and gloom. It's how that impacts on people with more severe disease. I mentioned that the age group that it's particularly been affecting, and almost certainly some of that is increased testing due to people going to Christmas parties and due to going back to see their families. But also we think socializing is probably behind some of that spread, but also almost certainly Omicron as well, leading to that high increase. So it's not, you can't explain all of it by just saying this is people doing more tests. It's definitely more than doing more tests. It's definitely higher transmission. So Omicron is showing very rapid spread. We do know it's more transmissible in households. So once you get one person in the household, it spreads much more than Delta did. And as people will be aware, we know that there's less immunity provided by previous infection or from previous vaccination. The severity of it does remain unclear. And again, you'll see this information in the press from time to time, and lots of speculation. Having absolutely concrete data in the UK is still hard to come by. It looks like there may be some data released in the next few days. Probably, it is too early to say, but there are some signs from biological studies that there may be slightly less severe infection, certainly lower down in the lungs from Omicron. However, and this will have been stressed as well, even if we see for example, half the severity or half the number of people experiencing severe infection compared to Delta, if we have 4 times the number of people infected, that would still be a very significant impact potentially on hospitalizations. So it's very, very difficult to call at the moment. There are some early signs it may be less severe, but what the impact of that is on hospitalizations, really too difficult to say, and it could still be very significant. And alongside that, self-isolation for cases could also impact on business continuity and be a big issue in itself. Good news is that booster doses do seem to increase the response to the infection very significantly, particularly against serious disease and death. And again, I know people will be familiar with this, just trying to bring everyone onto the same page as well, though. So there is the accelerated booster programme, and I'll mention that locally in a moment. General measures which have already been announced by Welsh Government, so schools being delayed by a couple of days at the start of the spring term, with a potential for remote and blended learning after that, and that will depend on what happens over the next few days. No spectators at any sports fixtures and nightclubs closed after Christmas. Modified alert level 2 has been announced today by Welsh Government, so there's an advisory element to that around reducing household mixing, but nothing regulatory. But there will be a regulatory rule of 6 in hospitality environments, and gatherings limited to 30 or 50, and stricter measures in place in businesses, so things like social distancing, for example, and one-way systems. But to be aware that Omicron, because of the spread across the UK and now in Wales, it is now being considered business as usual. So we've moved back to treating Omicron cases the same as any other case, rather than a few weeks back we were having a differential way of asking people to isolate and following up those cases. We have also moved now in Wales as well, saying that fully vaccinated contacts and people under 17 don't need to isolate if they're a contact, but they are recommended to take daily lateral flow tests. And our regional response is mirroring that. So we've got our booster programme. Everyone who's eligible for a booster has now been sent an appointment for that. So they should be able to get their booster hopefully by the end of the year. And community pharmacy mobile unit has been doing the rounds in the Vale, and that's continuing, which is really good to see. We have got a robust contact tracing mechanism in place that is increasingly using digital contact, so people will receive what's called an e-form, so asked to fill something in online initially. That's just because of the sheer numbers of cases we're seeing, but also to improve the efficiency of that process. And as Rob alluded to right at the beginning, we do have a series of regular meetings where we review cases on a daily and weekly basis within the region. So I guess overall, we have got a prolonged period of uncertainty coming up around Omicron. We do expect very high case rates to be seen, with an impact on the workforce as well in the public sector and private sector. We are likely to see a number of hospitalizations. The severity of Omicron is unclear, but it could be significant. We are thinking, based on experience in South Africa, but now also in England, that the wave may be relatively short, so have a very high peak, but peak quickly, depending on the impact of the regulations which have, or the restrictions which have been announced today. It's possible that wave is slightly elongated, so effectively flattening the peak but spreading them out a little bit. So we're thinking at the moment January, possibly late January into February as well. It depends really, and it's too early to call for sure. Rollout of the booster is our key defence, so that's absolutely vital, and we would encourage everyone who hasn't had their booster dose to do so as soon as possible. And if people haven't, for any reason, had any dose of vaccine yet, or only one dose, please come forward and have your vaccine. And we've got national measures in place now in an attempt to reduce transmission as well. That's my summary.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that very succinct presentation. And it's open to members now. Any member? Yeah, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just about the booster vaccine programme. It's a personal thing. My wife and myself needed to postpone ours, and we tried to ring to cancel it, obviously not wanting to not turn up. But every time we rang, we were told by the machine that we were 19th in the queue. And we rang and rang and rang, and we actually failed to get through. So in the end, we didn't turn up because we couldn't. Have we got enough people manning the telephones for this, or is there a better way of contacting? Because I know a lot of people. It is said that people are missing their appointments, but when it's almost impossible to let someone know and to make alternative arrangements, you can understand why.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I can attempt to, and I should say that I'm not involved directly in the vaccination programme myself, so I can only give you a bit of an answer if that's okay, I'm afraid. So you're absolutely right. There has been a huge pressure on the vaccination call centre in the last few weeks, as you can imagine. This has all been accelerated at very short notice, and the teams are doing a fantastic job at trying to get all of the vaccination appointments in. There has been a call out through the public sector and to the public as well, trying to get additional staff in to help with that, and I know they've managed to recruit at very short notice a large number of staff to help with that. So with a bit of luck, that should be better now. I know there have been problems getting through, and that there is a plan to offer people who've not been able to have their booster by the end of December to offer in the first couple of weeks of January, to make sure that people get a chance to have it as soon as possible within the new year as well. So hopefully that will address your concerns, but I know that this is being looked at carefully within the call centre environment.
Okay, thanks, Tom, and thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Driscoll.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just observation, really, Tom. Rob referred to London and how badly affected there, and that we usually see the ripple effect 2 or 3 weeks later. However, I mean, our vaccination rate is hugely higher than London. And also, it's entirely different population density. Do you think we'll be affected as badly as London, or do you think we'll hopefully miss out?
It's a good question, and it's probably one that we just need to have a bit of a crystal ball to be able to give you a proper answer for. I'm afraid I don't think that there's anyone could say with any certainty. What I would say is that I think you're right that population density does contribute, and that the vaccination rate we would hope would provide some level of protection. It probably won't provide a huge, if people have had 2 doses rather than the booster, it may not provide a huge protection against symptomatic illness. So that may not protect the case rates particularly, but it should protect against serious illness. So it may be that we see slightly lower hospitalisation rates. What we also know from previous waves of COVID is that you tend to have this slightly strange effect where areas which are hit hard in one wave then have quite a quiet period afterwards, because a lot of people have developed immunity from COVID at that stage, and therefore the virus goes almost dormant in that area for a little while. But then in subsequent waves, if they've been missing out, then it comes back again. So you kind of see this alternating pattern between different areas. So we have had quite a lot of infection kind of rumbling on in South Wales for the last few months. It's possible that will contribute to kind of background immunity for us. I think it's very hard to tell. So maybe we'll be better than London, but I wouldn't like to stick my neck out and say, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks for that. Cheers, Chair.
Okay, over to any other member. Okay, I got a few questions then in that case. Thank you very much for turning up, Tom. I really appreciate it, and I thought the graphs were very interesting. But obviously, somewhere like London, and I know there's certain boroughs like Wandsworth, Lambeth, where cases are going up to like 4,500 cases per 100,000, which is extremely alarming. And then put that in that context, I think that is roughly about 7 times more than what we got with Eltham Morgan at the moment. So clearly, you know, there are some serious issues here. But one of my concerns, and knowing people from London, in London and myself, in those areas, that there are many people express my concerns to me about the effectiveness of lateral flow testing in terms of Omicron, and whether it is slightly, the anecdotal evidence presented to me seems as though it's less reliable. And in fact, what people might need to do is do the lateral flow test more often, perhaps, in order to make it more. It seems to be a sort of a gap. And I just wondered if you got any evidence to indicate that, perhaps. And also, some people have had quite a few negative cases of lateral flow tests, but actually when they're gone, because they show symptoms, they've had their PCR test and it's come out as positive. And I just wondered if there's any data to indicate with Omicron, is lateral flow test slightly less effective? That's my first question. My second question was about vaccines. A couple of people have asked me about how long does it take for a booster to really kick in terms of effectiveness, in terms of building up antibodies. So I wouldn't mind that sort of answer. And the other point in relation to vaccines, I noticed that the Pfizer has been given the okay from 5-year-olds plus in England. Are there any plans to do something in Wales? And are there any plans to kind of encourage younger children doing it. I was also going to ask a question about mask wearing for children as well. At the moment, it's not. In fact, I think very few children wear masks for one reason or another. I just wonder with the new variant, is it more advisable for them to wear masks, not just to protect other children, but also the wider community? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll take them one by one if that's all right. Apologies if I missed one out. First question about lateral flow tests and PCRs and which is more reliable and reliable in terms of Omicron. So the evidence that I've seen to date, the UK HSA Health Security Agency, which replaced Public Health England, has done an initial look at the accuracy of lateral flow tests and whether they are still helpful in Omicron. And their initial summary, I think it came out at the end of last week, was that they still work perfectly well and we should rely on them. Now, obviously, with any of these things, they will continue to look at the evidence for that. And as data accumulates, it's possible that they may say it's slightly less effective or slightly more effective. But certainly their initial look was that we should continue to use them. They're perfectly good at picking up Omicron anyway. So that's the first bit. The second bit about PCR, people testing PCR positive after testing lateral flow negative. In a sense, that's not a surprise. So we've always known that lateral flow tests are slightly less sensitive and slightly less specific than PCR anyway. PCR is the best test we have, but it's obviously not as practical to use on a regular basis, and it's much more costly. So trying to weigh up those pros and cons mean that people now are being asked quite rightly to do lateral flow tests, but if they have any concerns, they should do a PCR test. And that's why the PCR is the confirmatory test. So lateral flows will occasionally miss people, but that's why PCRs are used in that circumstance. So your next question was about how long it takes for the booster dose to work. So my understanding, and as I mentioned before, I'm not intimately involved in the vaccination program, but my understanding is that the previous doses, when you have the standard, the initial, what we originally considered a course of COVID vaccination, which was 2 doses, the second dose would take up to 2 weeks to start to produce effective antibodies. My understanding from the early studies of the third dose was that actually happened much quicker. So it could be even within a few days that you start to increase your immune response. I've not seen anything formal on that recently, and it might be that various additional studies have come out which kind of hone that answer. In either case, I would say 2 weeks at most, possibly quicker. You then mentioned about the vaccination for 5-year-olds. I may have misread it, so don't quote me, but I think I saw in the news only a few minutes ago that the recommendation, I think, is for vulnerable children rather than all 5-year-olds, 5 to 10-year-olds. So, and if that is the case, I haven't yet seen a Welsh Government response to it. In general, Welsh Government, their approach has been to try and follow the evidence presented by JCVI. So my assumption is that we would follow that route in Wales as well. But I haven't seen anything to confirm that yet, because I think JCVI have only just made that announcement. But that, as far as I'm aware, it's not for all children of that age group. It's only children who are in higher risk groups. And then finally, you asked about masks. And this is reviewed, the use of face coverings is reviewed from time to time by a number of different bodies about their effectiveness and appropriateness. WHO, the World Health Organization, did a big review about this a few months back, looking at different ages and settings and looking at the evidence in all of these. And in general, the younger that children get, the more the harms or the disbenefits of wearing a mask outweigh the benefits. And that's for a number of reasons, but that includes things like the children not actually being able to wear them properly. So especially for younger children, they'll put their hand all over them and stuff will come out the sides. It won't be fitted properly.
Plenty of adults that do that anyway, as we know.
Well, absolutely. But it makes it more difficult to then give a general recommendation for younger children to wear them. So at the moment, as you know, the recommendation is for older children above the age of 11. But again, these things are kept under review, and it's possible with Omicron that some new evidence will come out, but I've not seen anything specifically relating to Omicron and face coverings in younger children at this stage.
Thank you. I think Councillor Carroll wants to come in as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just, and thank you, Tom, for that presentation. It was really informative. It's just a question regarding the extent to which the experience in South Africa has informed our decision-making processes here, because I don't note the references to London, for example. Now, I read yesterday that in the past week, hospitalizations are down 25% in South Africa. Now, please correct me if that figure is incorrect, because obviously not some sources are more accurate than others, and it's merely posing the question. But assuming that the experience in South Africa is that they've had it milder than perhaps Delta and other waves we've had, it's a question as to whether you would expect similar to happen here. I know that people talk about how the population profile is different compared to South Africa. We've got a median age, I think, of 40, and theirs is 27. I think people also talk more about the fact that they've got potentially higher immunity through the sheer number of infections, but then we should, by that logic, have immunity through the vast number of vaccinations, which has been a truly outstanding number. So rather than asking you to address those points, because I appreciate that they may not be directly within your level of expertise, it's really just a broader question as to the extent to which the experience in South Africa is informing our decision making here, and compare that to the extent to which experiences in, say, other countries are.
Sure. Thanks for the question. It's a really important question, and kind of gets to the heart of how we spread evidence around based on what we're seeing elsewhere. So, as you're probably aware, for Cardiff and Vale specifically, in general, we're not going to be responding in any way which is significantly different to what happens across the rest of Wales, and we will be guided by the evidence which is looked at a national level within Wales, and they're informed by the technical advisory group, which informs Welsh Government. And the technical advisory group does take information from across the world, and I think you highlighted a number of very salient caveats around some of the experience in South Africa. So I would be the first to say that I think we have to make sure we don't treat the UK on an exceptional basis. You know, we have a population of humans as other countries do, and if we're seeing stuff happening elsewhere in the world, we should be paying attention to it. But equally, we also need to be aware that all the countries around the world have experienced slightly different waves of the pandemic, have different risk factors, different age profiles, as you mentioned. So we need to not assume that if one country is seeing something that it will necessarily be mirrored precisely in our country. So those factors have been looked at, and the data in South Africa is being looked at nationally by the technical advisory group, along with data from London. And I guess the reason why the data from London is more salient is just because it's much more likely to be relevant to the situation in the UK. But absolutely, the signals from South Africa are being looked at as well. And I think on the hospitalisation point, it's very difficult to call at the moment. We're seeing different signals coming from South Africa as opposed to London. And if you look at the age profile, that is really, really important, because we know that the people who are more likely to get severe illness are the older age group, and there are fewer of those in South Africa at the minute. So it does potentially play quite a big part.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Rob wants to come in now.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just felt, would it be appropriate now, having heard from Tom, if we gave you a little bit of an update as to where we are at an organisational level? Would that be helpful?
Yes, that would be helpful, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to dwell on many of these issues, but just to give members a bit of an overview, Tom's already sort of signposted what happened today, and I know a message has gone to all councillors this afternoon from myself and the leader, just alerting you all to the Welsh Government announcement at lunchtime. So in effect, what's happened today is there's a notification that we're going back into a new alert level 2 from 6 AM on Boxing Day. So what that means in effect and in summary, there'll be a requirement of 2 meters social distancing on premises open to the public and workplaces where that 2 meters social distancing is reasonable. Rule of 6 will apply to gatherings in certain regulated premises, and those include hospitality, cinemas, theatres. We're going to see a return to those licensed premises, making additional measures in place to protect customers and staff. That will include table service and contact details being collected. Face coverings will now be required in all hospitality settings at all times, apart from when people are seated. And there'll be a restriction on large events, so they will no longer be allowed indoors or outdoors, with a maximum number of people who can gather at an indoor event being 30 and 50 outdoors. For things like weddings, civil partnerships, funerals and wakes, the guidance there is that numbers will be determined by the venue and the ability of that venue to manage social distancing. There'll also be new guidance on mixing in private homes and gardens. And this is advice, but basically follow 5 simple measures. Limit the number of people visiting your house. If people are visiting, make sure people take a LFT before they come. Meet outdoors is better than indoors. If you are indoors, make sure you follow the advice in terms of ventilation wherever possible. We've heard the First Minister say repeatedly that you need to space out any visits to different people's homes and houses. And obviously the old advice is still the best, which is around social distancing and hand hygiene. There's also the changes to self-isolation of close contacts, which Tom has already alluded to. Earlier this week as well, we had additional working from home guidance, and again I've sent out notification of that to all members this afternoon. Basically that has been strengthened to protect employees. As an organisation, we have long advocated people should be working from home wherever possible, so that advice is continuing, and we've sent out additional new advice to all our staff as of today. Very quickly, in terms of the position with our schools, 2 planning days have been introduced for the start of the new term in January. And I know from the call that we were on this morning, there are more meetings taking place between now and January as to the situation with schools. I think the honest way to report this is that the situation is fluid at the moment, and there may well be changes in light of the Omicron wave hitting us in and around probably the start of January. So more details will follow on that, I suspect. But as soon as we get more details, we will let you all know. At this point, it's probably worth paying tribute to staff from across our schools for the work they've done over the last year to keep all the schools going over the last 12 months. It's been a really challenging year with lots of restrictions at different times, lots of different guidance and new advice coming out at various times during the year, where all those people working within the school setting have had to adapt and flex and change during the year. Very briefly, we are seeing significant pressures in terms of our capacity to deliver in certain areas. There is a real fragility in the market at the moment, particularly around social care. We've got 2 new corporate risks in our risk register, which were endorsed by the Governance and Audit Committee last week, and those 2 new risks are purely based around our capacity to deliver vital services and the impact of the COVID pandemic on our ability to build capacity into the system and to deliver services to some of the most vulnerable in our society. That's subject to regular discussion and consideration at our leadership team. And as I say, there's particular challenges within the social care sector. And as I've already mentioned with schools, I think, I'd like to take the opportunity to pay tribute to all our staff who are working on the front line, who have worked on the front line during the last 20 months. We've never seen a a time like it, and they will continue to deliver to the best of their ability during the Christmas period and into the new year, and I'm certain of that. Key to how we have responded has been the ability to communicate constantly with our staff, and that is something which we've put a lot of effort into over the last 20 months, and we will continue to do that. Because staff have had to work very, very differently over the last 20 months to keep delivering the services that we deliver. So I would like to thank every one of them for what they have done over the last 20 months. So I think that's it. That's a quick canter through the situation as it's impacted on our organisation, Chair. I don't know if Tom Bowring has anything extra he wants to add, because Tom has been working really closely with the UHB on the vaccination rollout in the Vale, and also linking into the IMT on a very frequent basis throughout the last year and a half as well.
I've got nothing to add, Chair, to the Managing Director's comments. Thank you, then.
Okay, can I also say, before I bring in Councillor Carroll in, can I also like to echo what Rob has said regarding the staff? I think the staff are very challenging. I think we're getting on for almost 20 months of this now, or 21 months about this. And clearly, you know, they have done superb. What I would also like to emphasise, of course, is that you're the leadership here. And you also done a magnificent job as well. And I think this is vital, and this is why the Vale Glamorgan is the most successful authority in Wales in terms of measurements. It's because we've got a superb leadership team, and that really helps everybody. And, you know, and I think that is vital. The only point I was going to make, though, is obviously next week. I know we got holidays, but I know how serious the issues are here. And I think a lot of teachers would like to have some degree of certainty about something like online learning or learning back face to face. And I think because people like to prepare, and it's important that we also have that information. And obviously, you said about social services, lots of people have care packages. There will be concerns amongst the community about those care packages and whether they're resilient going forward. So I'm wondering, perhaps, are we in discussions with other groups, other stakeholders, like GBS, for example, about voluntary people as well, and getting them on board if possible? I'm going to bring in George. So George may want to ask a question as well. George, do you want to ask a question or make an observation?
Thank you, Chair. It's regarding the impact of staff absences on frontline services. I mean, if staff go down with COVID, even if, and as we would all hope, they don't become seriously unwell, or maybe even don't even display symptoms at all, they're obviously going to have to isolate as per the rules. Now, it's just to gauge an opinion really from Rob as to the relevant contingency measures across a whole range of services that we have in place. How confident are you that those measures will be robust enough to, if not provide the services in their entirety, and I think there will be a level of understanding around that given the situation, nonetheless, how confident you are that we will be able to function and that things aren't going to grind to a complete halt because of staff absences that mean we can't actually deliver those services?
Okay, this is something that we've looked at really closely over the last, probably since September. Well, it's been at the heart of our discussion since March the 23rd last year. That date is etched in my memory and probably will be for a very long time. But certainly since September of this year, when the capacity issues have really come to the fore, if you like. If members cast their mind back, we had HGV driver shortages, which was common across organisations. We didn't escape that because it impacted on our waste collection, for example. But we got through that, and I am mindful that we've got a very, very loyal workforce in the Vale. And we've got a workforce that will continue to turn out for us. So the discussions that we have had has been around building capacity in the system when there are gaps, and I'm confident that that will see us through. I agree with Councillor Carroll, there will be occasions when things will get delayed, but I'm as confident as I can be that things won't completely fall over, particularly in some of those vital areas where people actually, people rely on us for those key services. And I know Tom has been working with Lance Carver and his team on some of the mitigation that we're putting into the social care system, things like the call for volunteers, fast tracking recruitment and issues like that. So I'll bring Tom in a moment on that. I can just deal with the issue around schools, Chair, which you raised around, is there going to be a move to online learning or is it going to be in person? The honest answer is I don't know, but we will know more before January and we will be communicating that as and when we get information. So yes, the holidays are coming up, but we do have a capacity to be able to attend briefings. The leader and myself have got one next Wednesday again with the health board. I've got a briefing with Welsh Government in the middle of next week. So those things will continue despite it being the sort of festive period. And once we know more, we'll be able to communicate that to our schools. The schools will be able to communicate it to parents and children. As things stand at the moment, there are 2 planning days and then children go back to school. So that's the situation as we find it now. Now that may change, it may not, but once we have clarity, we will let everyone know. So if I can bring Tom in on the social care work that we've been doing, just to partly answer your question and also partly answer Councillor Carroll's question.
Certainly, thanks, Rob. And this links back to the discussion that the committee you were having earlier on in terms of the fragility of the social care sector. We are experiencing issues in terms of the availability of frontline social care staff. That's not just within the local authority provided services, that's across the private sector as well. Work is underway, being supported really strongly by the council's HR team to launch this fast track to recruitment process in January. That means that we will be attracting and vetting, doing the DBS checks and training for staff, and then being able to deploy them into a range of different employers to support that. And in terms then of the residential care provision, a similar position with plans being made to ensure that there's sufficient cover over the Christmas period as well.
Thank you. I think Councillor John wants to come in, and I think this will be the last councillor to come in on this item before, because we've got quite a lot of a big agenda. Councillor John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to pay tribute to the staff, the social care staff and carers that have visited all these people throughout the Vale during this period. Has been absolutely fantastic. They've gone the extra mile at all conditions, day and night, and I have experienced this myself. And I can only praise our staff enough for the work they've done and continuing to do. I don't think people can understand what it's all about unless they've experienced this. And I must say our staff have been first class. And I would like to say as well, a particular thank you to all these refuse collectors. You know, they're out in all winds and weathers and they're doing a superb job. And I think, you know, when the going gets tough, the Vale gets going. And there's no doubt about it that we really have given our very best over the past period, and I'm sure we will continue to do so if this situation does get worse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you for those comments. I think we all like to echo those comments as well. And we wish all those staff a very good Christmas as well, given the circumstances. Okay, I think we're now moving on to the next item on the agenda. Okay, thank you very much for that, which is the annual delivery plan. Tom?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. This is a reference to your committee from Cabinet of the draft annual delivery plan for 2022 to 23. As you know, this is based on the Council's corporate plan for the 2020 to 25 period, which sets out our 4 wellbeing objectives to work with and for our communities to support learning, employment and sustainable economic growth, to support people at their home and in their community, and to respect, enhance and enjoy our environment. And the report that's in front of you this evening, Chair, sets out how we've gone about developing next year's draft annual delivery plan, how we look at that being a bridge between the corporate plan and the next year's actions. And you'll note that service planning will be presented to relevant scrutiny committees early in the 2022 calendar year. We're required to produce and publish our wellbeing objectives at the start of the financial year under the new obligations placed on us through the Local Government and Elections Act. And we also, as committee, are very well aware, are required to demonstrate our duty under the Future Generations Act as well. So the draft ADP, again, is being produced in pretty uncharted territory, but it does seek to provide that bridge between the corporate 5-year plan and what we're going to do in the coming year. And in this coming year, there's a particular emphasis on 6 cross-cutting themes which cut across all 4 of those wellbeing objectives, and there'll be actions being taken to contribute to each of them. The first of those themes is Project Zero, so delivering on our commitments to tackle climate change and respond to the nature emergency. The second is around building community capacity, so that's around increasing capacity within those communities to ensure that they've got a stronger voice and are able to influence and shape services and activities in the Vale. There's a strong influence within the plan on tackling hardship, so meeting the needs of those who are experiencing hardship, for example, financial difficulty, housing need, or difficulties accessing suitable employment. We've particularly paid attention to the care and support theme within the draft plan as well. So meeting the needs of our more vulnerable residents, ensuring that people have got access to the care and support that they need to keep them safe and well, and also reflecting, importantly, physical and mental health within that particular theme. The penultimate theme then is around transformations. That brings together the work of with our community in terms of tackling climate change, but also in how we use our people, our technology and our assets. And then finally, Chair, the 6th theme is around infrastructure. So that's around investing in our schools and housing and making sure that we've got the right infrastructure in the Vale to support economic, social, environmental and cultural wellbeing. So the plan itself has been developed through a series of detailed discussions with the strategic leadership team, as you'd expect. In drafting the plan, we've looked at our performance and progress against the current plan, our new approach to the transformation of the organisation through reshaping. As you'd expect us to do, we've looked at the corporate risk register, our statutory duties, the resources that are available to us, our coronavirus recovery strategy, and the wellbeing assessment that is being produced by the PSB. So this is coming to your committee this evening, Chair, as part of all scrutiny committees seeing this before Christmas. The consultation period is currently live. That started on the 29th of November and runs to the 9th of January. And that's being undertaken with the public, with our partners, our staff, trade union colleagues, town and community councils, and as well as yourselves. We'll look then at the feedback from that consultation process in January, and we propose to bring an updated draft of the ADP back to your committee on the 17th of February before Cabinet consider and endorse on the 28th of February, and it will then go on to full council on the 7th of March. So that's an overview of where we are, Chair.
Thank you very much. Open to any member? I've got no one indicating. Oh, yes, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Tom. And just briefly, this is as you say, this is the bridging between, sort of the action plans and the wider corporate plan. There's an awful lot in here which I think is actually reflective of the sheer breadth of work which the council does. I think the only problem I have, I don't want to call it a problem, that sounds like I don't want to problematize this, is that these are a lot of outputs, it's a lot of lists, because it's part of something wider. I think my only issue really is about sharpening some of the language that's related to these lists, because some of them seem to have I think quite an obvious output related to them. We're going to develop a plan, we're going to implement a plan, we're going to create another set of indicators that we'll then develop another plan out of. But some of them are then become a little bit vague or wishy-washy. So top objective 1 will work with not-for-profit voluntary community organisations to deliver and shape local services and to encourage people to get more involved in local communities. That's great, but that's not actually, there's not actually an output from that. So it's just that some of them, so we develop and deliver a comprehensive induction program is an output. There's something that we'll see after that. Whereas not all of them that's the case, and sometimes it feels that they've been thrown in because they're the correct buzzwords to be used, but I'm not quite sure what output is a result of that, presuming then that will then lead to the wider outcomes. So it's not really a criticism because it's very comprehensive, although obviously this is one of those areas where it's easier to criticise what's written in front of you than it is to recognise what's actually missing, because when you've got 40, 50 different outputs, then obviously that just shows the breadth of work that's being carried out. Thank you.
Okay, I think point noted, Councillor Johnson. Has anyone got anything specific at all? I got a few things I want to ask specifically about certain things. Some things for sort of clarification really as well. Page 10 on objective 1. Okay, it says on objective 1 on page 10, it's about age-friendly status. How are we getting on with that at the moment? I just wondered, and that's the first question. I'm not necessarily asking for answers now, Tom. By all means, you can go away, have your Christmas turkey, and then you can have a look at it afterwards. The next one after that is the information about the Centre of Learning and Wellbeing on page 12. The page 13 is Move More and Eat Well plan, and page 14 is Your Choice, and that's it for me. Just I'm not asking you if you don't have the information now. I'm more than happy for you to circulate to all members. Just updates on that, really.
That's fine, Chair. And very, very briefly, in terms of age friendly, we've secured some funding from Welsh Government, which is supporting the application and the process to become recognised as being age friendly as a county. That's being progressed with our Public Services Board partners as well. I will circulate by email to members the update and some more information around the Centre of Learning and Wellbeing. That's not something that's within my particular area. The Move More Eat Well plan is definitely focusing in on the early years. So we're working with Big Fresh within schools, for example, and also links in to some of our food poverty work that's being progressed. And I'll ask colleagues in social services to provide you with an update in terms of Your Choice, but that's very much about devolving or sharing responsibility for making decisions and putting more of that towards families and the care receiver than us. So I'll get some more detail behind each of those four and get those circulated.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is now annual delivery plan monitoring report. Over to you, Tom, again.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I may, I'll quickly share my screen so that you can see the presentation. This is appended to the report that you've got in front of you this evening, Chair. So this is as at the end of September, which feels a lifetime ago now. And this is the progress against the 2021-22 annual delivery plan. You'll see that overall the RAG status for the ADP is green at the end of quarter 2. This slide here shows you the actions, the measures, and then the overall objectives. So you can see that we're not anticipating this to worsen as a position, and the overall position is green. We set out within the report and within this presentation around some of the achievements against each of the 4 wellbeing objectives. You'll see that we continue to reach high number of people through social media, and also the number of people subscribing to our Vale Connect bulletins via email has increased further. So we've got nearly 82,000 of those now. Performance at the contact centre at the end of September was that nearly 90% of customer inquiries being resolved at first point of contact there, and an equally high proportion of internal service desk tickets being processed in the same way by our IT service. There's a link here that I thought would be of interest to committee members to the Council's Culture Book, a significant development by OD and HR, which brings together a picture, if you like, of the culture of the organisation through a series of stories, and there's a link to that in your papers as shown here. Within Objective 2, we're highlighting the focus around the enforcement teams continuing to support businesses to comply with regulations where necessary, and Rob mentioned earlier around the work that our schools colleagues have been doing to continue to ensure that pupils get the best access to education that they can do. We're also here highlighting the work that we've done in terms of the support to our UHB colleagues around testing and vaccination, and we're also making sure that lateral flow tests are made available to council staff, and indeed Rob messaged all colleagues this afternoon to remind them of the process for getting those. And finally, within Objective 4, we launched the Climate Change Challenge Plan as a result of Cabinet's approval in July, and work has progressed during the quarter on that. We've also done a significant amount of work around the Healthy Travel Charter, which is a joint charter with the PSB, and the installation of electric vehicle charging points is underway, and work is being undertaken with our infrastructure at the main corporate office buildings to make sure that they're available to staff and to visitors. Looking specifically at the actions and measures within the remit of your committee, Chair, there are 140 actions and 13 measures being tracked. As usual, we're highlighting here for you those that are the exceptions. So you can see on the screen links to those that are red, and there are 7 actions which have slipped. 6 of those are for non-COVID related reasons, and there are 6 measures that have also slipped, and they're split 50-50 between COVID related and non-COVID related. And members will note within Appendix C to this report that you've got a breakdown of those exceptions and reasons for that slippage. We're highlighting here some of the areas that we need to improve upon. I won't go into this in great detail, but you'll see that there is the impact of a variety of things playing out on our progress in certain areas. So, for example, completing the C1V refurbishment project has been delayed because of internal and external capacity and supply issues. We've reported previously to your committee around absence and turnover. We also need to continue to support work to decarbonise our school assets, improve air quality around schools, and raise awareness of young people in relation to climate and nature emergencies, and that will be progressed through Project Zero. We're looking to undertake that stakeholder engagement to inform a review of future service modelling within social services. And then finally, within Objective 4, there are a variety of issues here that we need to progress, including the completion of the rollout of the blueprint for waste and recycling collections in Penarth. There's work underway around the local flood risk management strategy. I know work is progressing around the completion of streetlight conversion to LED, and also to update and bring the next iteration of the biodiversity forward work programme in forward plan forward in order to respond to the recent declaration of that nature emergency. I think we've probably covered within previous discussion most of the coronavirus recovery updates. The only one I suppose to flag particularly here is the work that is underway looking at the 3 main corporate office buildings and how they may be used in the future to support a hybrid model of working between home and the office for our staff. I think others here we've largely covered, Chair. And that's a really quick overview.
Now, and thank you very much for that succinct presentation. Can we now, we've got members, Councillor John, first of all.
Thank you, Chairman. Tom, excellent report as usual. I'd just like to take up on page 5 what we need to improve. And it's under objective 1. And it's the one halfway down the page. Progress the transfer of assets for other organisations to operate facilities. Now, this has been hanging around for a long time, and I think we need to look at this again. We need to look at this at depth, because the idea was originally that this was to ask clubs to take over facilities. And I don't think that has been met too kindly by many clubs, because during the COVID situation, we found that many clubs are going out of business. So basically, I think we need to look at this in a wider terms, because there are ways and means around it. But certainly, I don't think passing all these pitches and what have you back to clubs are going to work out, because I just cannot see how we're going to do that. So maybe in the new year, we could talk about this with the department again. I'd be quite prepared to discuss some of my ideas around it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. I just wonder if Tom could go into a little bit more detail regarding the situation, given that we are, this is the Q2 update and we're now, at the end of Q3. Just wonder if there's any progress, particular reference to the stakeholder engagement regarding future service modelling and with regards to the flood risk management strategy. Obviously, that's anything to do with social services obviously is very urgent right now, given the market situation, as you're aware. And I think we spent a lot of time this year discussing flood risk, and concerned that we have as updates as possible. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I got some points as well. On Appendix B, page 4, Vale Connect, how many followers we got on Twitter, and whether we're increasing or staying the same or decreasing. Armed Forces Covenant on page 5, information about reports and where they're going to and how we can have an input or update on that. Page 6, the dementia group, are they working with town and community councils? Page 11, an update on the Cogan interchange on page 11. Okay, and that's me.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. With your permission, I'll ask for updates from the relevant departments to answer Councillor Johnson's queries around the flood risk management work and the stakeholder engagement work, and I'll ask that that's circulated as soon as it's available. I don't, embarrassingly, as the person who is responsible for our Twitter account, I don't have the Twitter followers number to hand. However, I will have that circulated to you later this evening, alongside some more information around the armed forces, that dementia work regarding town and community councils, and an update on the Cogan interchange for you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and I've got no one else make any comments. And Councillor Johnson, you'll come back. Sorry, Councillor Johnson.
I believe it's 21,500 Twitter followers, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's pretty good. That's about 20 of just almost 20% of the population of Vale Glamorgan. That's pretty good. Okay. All right then. I'm sure not all of them live in the Vale Glamorgan, of course. All right then. So we're now moving on to the next item. Thank you very much for that. Okay, we're now on to revenue monitoring now, and I think it's open to Carolyn Michael.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report outlines the position with regard to revenue budget monitoring for the period 1st of April to the 30th of September. It takes into account the ongoing impact of the pandemic on the council finances. The revenue position for 21-22 continues to be challenging for the council, both operationally and financially, due to the ongoing impact of the pandemic. Funding continues to be available from Welsh Government to cover the financial pressures to the end of the year. However, just to point out that some of the funding is changing, and the funding, for example, for the social care is actually tapering off between now, September, and the end of the financial year. Claims continue to be made on a monthly basis, and we have provided a breakdown in the report. At this time of year, the original budget is usually reviewed for any required adjustments, and an amended budget is calculated, and this is shown in Appendix 1 to the report. Now, the adjustments made don't affect the overall net bottom position of the council. They're accounting adjustments largely outside the control of the services, or they are viations between services. So say the bottom line position is not changed by these adjustments. Paragraph 2.10 of the report has a table which details the current projections for the year. A small overspend has been reported this time for learning and skills, in addition to those already reported in social services and the environment and housing division. Again, as I say, these have been reported to committee previously. All of the reported overspends will be met from reserves held, and details are contained by service throughout the report. The report details a projected favourable balance on the general policy budget. £2 million is relating to capital charges, and also there's £2 million on the council tax budget. Due to the uncertainty around the level of the settlement at the time of writing this report, and the value of the cost pressures that were received, it was proposed that this sum was transferred into the council fund, and it would be used potentially for any future issues, and considered by the budget working group at the time when it could take into all factors that were presented as part of the revenue and capital budget settlement, and it will be taken account of when the final proposals are presented to Cabinet and Council in February and March. The report also outlines the efficiency target set for the year of £500,000, and it is showing a shortfall against this target. I'm happy to take any questions. That's a sort of a summary of the content of the report, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I got Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Carolyn, for the report. Obviously, it's a fast-changing situation this year, as we already know from discussions tonight. I was just wondering though if you could give a bit more information about the £4 million favourable position for the general policy. I mean, on the one hand, I mean, we did have a discussion about council tax collection back during the budget debate in March, where we were discussing so whether it would bounce back or not. So I'm interested to hear whether that's a recovery from last year or additional collection this year, because obviously the percentage of collection was recalibrated. So I'm interested to hear that, and also just an explanation of the capital charges and where that's come from.
Okay, that's fine. First of all, on the capital charges, we retain a budget for repaying of loans, the capital charges relating to loans. What we've been able to do this year is, because we haven't actually needed to borrow as significantly, we've been able to borrow internally. So therefore, by borrowing internally saves us money rather than going to borrow externally. So as I say, that saves us money, but obviously we don't want to change what the budget is, because obviously in future years, perhaps when the reserves are reduced, we will have to go out and borrow externally, and we'll therefore need that budget to be there. So as I say, that underspend has come around, as I say, due to the ability of us to borrow internally rather than externally. With regard to the council tax, we have increased our council tax collection arrears. The arrears have gone down from the beginning of the year by £2 million. Also, there are, and I can't tell you exactly the quantity, but there has been a reduction in the number of exempt properties, and the number of properties in the Vale have actually increased. So it is a combination of factors that has led to that £2 million.
Thank you. Any other member? Okay, move that we note. Okay, thank you very much. And we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is capital monitoring.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll take this one as well. So the capital monitoring is covering the period of 1st of April 21 to the 30th of September. The report provides the current position with regard to the capital programme. Of particular note, there's some increasing costs on some of the schemes due to uplift in plant and material costs, which I think we have previously talked about. We have previously reported in other meetings. There's grants received from Welsh Government to fund some initiatives. So there's the food pod in Penarth and money to support early year and childcare. There's also some use of Section 106 initiatives. And there's receipt of funding from Welsh Government to support active travel. There's also receipt from local transport fund as well. So the report also, lists down any emergency powers and delegated authority that has been used to bring these particular schemes into the capital programme. And Appendix 1 to the report provides a list in detail of all the schemes that the council currently has at the moment. I'm not sure if anyone has any specific questions on any of the individual schemes. Thank you.
Okay, open to any member. Councillor Carroll.
Yes, it's thank you, Carolyn, for that, and thank you, Chair. It's just a question regarding the Landock bus shelter funded through Section 106 monies. The bus shelter was damaged in an incident, I think it was October or November last year. So basically, it's been over 12 months since that bus shelter has been out of place. And it's a service that many people, especially elderly and more vulnerable members of the community, rely on. So it was just really to urge that that work is carried out as soon as possible, because we've been waiting a long time for it, and it's been much missed. So appreciate it's not within your remit to get that action, but thought it would be worth putting it on the record.
No, that's perfectly fine. I will take that back and speak to the relevant officers with it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right then, Councillor Johnson, and then Councillor King. Do you want to respond back on Landock bus shelter?
Yeah, just very briefly. I share Councillor Carroll's concern. My understanding is that it's substantially tied up. Well, the delay was to do with insurance agreements, but it's to do with this blessed supply chain problem about the delivery. I'm assured February, but every time I ask, it seems to sort of it's like sort of chasing after a bus. No matter how fast I run, it seems to be a bit further away.
Okay, well, thank you for that update, Councillor King, on that. Councillor Johnson next, then Councillor John.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points I just want to raise within the Barry area. Firstly, last week we had, with the council, put out a press release regarding the situation at a Skolsamp Barracks new site on Barry waterfront. Now, obviously the current site is within my ward, and my also part of the catchment area for the new site, but I don't think I get any advance notice about that or the ongoing problems there. So I think I'm a little concerned about how that's progressing, and also just confirmation of how that profiling is working within the the time frame here for Band B schemes. Secondly, there's continued reference to the Barry Dock Transport Interchange, and there's some funding that's been put forward, which has got Merthyr as the lead authority on this project. I'm just wondering exactly what's involved in that £327,000 spending, and whether that's actually happening within this financial year.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I think I will have to come back to you on those questions, because I'm not I haven't got the detail in front of me on those particular schemes. So if you mind, if Rob might come in, I was going to say otherwise I'll come back to you, but Rob might want to say something.
Yeah, Rob, do you want to say something about this or the scheme in the waterfront?
I can update Councillor Johnson on the Ysgol and Barrack new school site on the waterfront, because I think it's fair to say that it's a matter of public record that the council is extremely frustrated at the delays. The school community is frustrated at the delays, and we've basically been looking to get some progress on this urgently over the last few months, to the extent where the position that we are in is, if there is no progress immediately, we would like to take the site back and deliver the school ourselves. We've got a good track record of delivering 21st century Band B schools. We're delivering the first zero carbon school in Wales. We've got a number of primary schools that we've delivered, secondary schools in Barry where we've delivered them successfully within budget, on time. And it's just it's a regret of mine, and I know colleagues share this regret, that we're way behind schedule on this school site. Simply because it's caught up in legal agreements with the consortium. There have been meetings, regular meetings over the last week or so, and there has been progress in getting to a situation where work will start on site. The latest position is piling is due to start on the site in the middle of January. I am told that there has been considerable movement over the last few days in terms of getting contracts signed, so I do remain hopeful that when we come back in January there will be a far more positive picture in terms of being able to give specific timelines. As it is now, it's unlikely that we will get the school completed until the middle of 2023. That's the current timings. And when you bear in mind that the school should have been up and running by now, that's far from acceptable, which is why the council's taken the view, you know what, if you can't do it, if you don't want to do it, if you're not interested in doing it, give it to us and we'll do it. And I think that is, I know that is our position as things stand at the moment. It won't affect the funding stream, because Band B funding runs for a considerable amount of time, and many authorities across Wales have got a lot of schools coming forward at the end of the Band B funding window. We've been successful in delivering schools at the front end of the window in the Vale, so it won't impact on the funding stream. But the longer we leave it, there is an implication for more costs in terms of material costs, supply chain issues, and we are seeing elements of that at the moment. But that cost, as things stand, that cost is something that we're working on sharing with the consortium, because Councillor Johnson would be aware that the school site is a single form entry site school. We have chosen to build a 2-form entry school and we're carrying part of the cost for that. So that's in part why there have been delays, because of the issues around contracts and money and who picks up what costs. But I am hopeful that we're getting there. Fallback, as I've just said, and at the risk of repeating myself, the fallback is we take the site back and we do it ourselves. I'll come back on the park and ride transport interchange scheme, Chair, if that's okay.
That's okay. Councillor Burnett, do you want to come in on this?
Yes, I just wanted to make a short comment on that and reinforce what Rob said. I think I mean, I think most would know that in terms of actually getting the road built on the waterfront, it took having weekly meetings with the consortium to do it, and it became apparent when we had a meeting with the consortium over the school development that there were areas that we were not comfortable with, and so we took the step to say, well, this actually stops now. We will, if this does not get sorted, we will take legal action to take the site back. I mean, we actually said, well, why don't you just give it to us and we'll do it. When you have people saying, well, you know, COVID, etc., and we said, well, actually, we've built 3 secondaries and 2 primaries this year. That's actually not a workable excuse. So hopefully, as Rob said, hopefully we've got some movement. I'm waiting to hear in the next couple of days whether or not we've got things tied up before Christmas. But I think the only reassurance is that we had a cross-departmental team out on site from the council, so that we had absolutely every angle covered with the consortium, and we will continue to work in that way to ensure that the school is delivered.
Thank you. Councillor John now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share Councillor Carroll's concern about the bus stop, but Councillor King summed it up. We're in the same position at Boverton, where we're waiting for a bus stop exactly the same, and it's all down to supply. So my concern basically is many of these projects will not go ahead this current year, and they'll be carried forward later when we go over into March, because quite honestly, with COVID come back now, that's going to delay them even more. So we just got to keep our fingers crossed, but they're going to start piling up on us, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Okay. I haven't got anyone else responding. So thank you very much for that. And we're now moving on. Okay, we move you note those points and those recommendations. We go on to reference number 8, which is Treasury Management Mid-Year Report. Carolyn.
Thank you, Chair. So the report details a range of external influences that have impacted on the Treasury management activity of the Council during the year. These include the COVID-19 pandemic, which has continued to impact on all economies around the world this year. In the UK, interest rates have remained low, but obviously have increased recently. We are now seeing pressure on price, in particular utilities and fuel. In other countries, the economic recovery has tended to depend on their vaccination programme, which has impacted on how quickly they are able to lift restrictions. And they have been able to manage this during the pandemic to varying effects. Global economic pressure during the year has included disruption to worldwide supply chains, as we're obviously just talking about now, and increased the transport and increased problems in filling job vacancies. Having reviewed this year's capital programme, the borrowing requirements of the Council have changed and are now estimated to be 11.8 million this financial year. This sum will fluctuate depending on the delivery of the capital programme, but it's likely that this sum required will, as I said just recently, will be borrowed internally this year, although we do have some significant PWB repayment profiles and some large sums are projected for HRA borrowing. The Council's investment strategy is to secure the best return on its investments. We've always been in that position. Throughout the period under review, the authorities continue to use the broader range of investment tools. So we are placing investments with local authorities, with the Debt Management Office, Treasury bills. We have recently moved into the money market funds, and we have got an instant access account with Lloyds. We have, in the last few weeks as well, also opened notice accounts with Santander Bank, where we will benefit from higher returns, provided that we comply with the period of notice that we have to give on these accounts, because the accounts we have set up with them are notice accounts. It's also proposed it had been proposed actually to extend the maturity period of the loans to other local authorities from 365 days to 2 years. The maximum deposits per institution would be £5 million, and taking into account reserve projections, it's proposed that the maximum sum invested over those 364 days will be restricted to £10 million in total. The Treasury Management Strategy for the year establishes a range of indicators, and the report details these, and they have been met over the last 6 months. The report confirms all Treasury Management activity has been complied with in line with the Treasury Management Strategy, with the CIPFA Code of Practice and all other legislative provisions. So that's a brief rundown of the report, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Open to any member? Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Just very briefly, Karen mentioned at the start the increase in the base rate. I'm just wondering what impact that's likely to have, or is that actually so minimal as to be, without further increases, which may be unlikely in the current circumstances? Is that something that's likely to impact us substantially or not?
I wouldn't say it was going to impact substantially, but for instance, when we invest overnight with the Debt Management Office, previously the rate had been negative, so we haven't been investing with them. But this week the rate has gone up to 0.07% on one day, and I think it was 0.03%. So I'd say at least it's not negative. So we're taking the positives out of it, but we are obviously, as I say, we have looked at wider means of investing because the Debt Management Office was a negative overnight. So that's where we have looked at other accounts. And I think it will obviously take a while for some changes in the interest rates to come through, but they are still going to be marginal.
Thank you, Councillor Driscoll.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Caroline, just a note, observation really on the difference between the income on the our lending compared to the rates on our borrowings, really, 4.639 and 0.108%. Huge discrepancy. Is there? I mean, I'm sure you've taken great advice on this, but is there no way that we could sort of get those figures closer together? Also, are these is 146 million at 4.6%? Is that a fixed rate, or will it fluctuate with the increase in interest rates, which unfortunately look as if they're only going to go one way from here?
Yeah. Well, with our loans, the loans we enter into, where we are borrowing, they are fixed rates, so the change in interest rates won't affect those. And they are long-term loans that we have taken out many years ago, so they will stay the same, and we won't be able to change that. I suppose the only thing is if we do start new borrowing, obviously it'll be at a lower rate, but no, the loans are fixed rates, we can't change that. And as I say, with regard to where we're investing, as I say, we do try to invest where we can to get better rates, but at the moment the rates are so low that we aren't able to get a very good rate. But as I say, what we have tried to do is avoid having to have a negative rate, so we actually get back less than we invested in the first place. So it's just sort of difficult times at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Bye.
Okay, fine. I think move that we note, and we're now moving on to the next item on the agenda. Okay, which is now in the initial revenue budget proposals and medium-term financial plan. Over to you, Karen.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We have got some slides on this, which I think Mark will be able to load for us. So just to say, obviously, you've had the report, which we produced back in, it went to Cabinet in November. And in that report, what hasn't changed is you've got the cost pressures there in the appendix, which we can discuss later. But what we've done today is, because the settlement came out yesterday, we've got a set of slides just to sort of provide you with an update on what the potential position is. So if I just run through those. Next slide, please, Mark. Okay, so if you can see that. So basically, as I say, the settlement, or provisional settlement, should I say, came out yesterday. What is showing us is an increase of 10.51% after adjustments for transfers in, and the council tax base adjustments have also been included in it. This equates for the authority to an additional settlement of 17.695 million. We are above the average settlement for Wales. We are the 4th highest settlement, and this is driven by the increase in population and the increase in pupil numbers in the Vale. The settlement also includes funding which has been provided for national insurance increase, and it also includes funding for the teachers' pay and pension for 21-22 and 22-23, even though we won't know all the details on the 22-23 as yet. There was a comment in the settlement which said that pandemic funding has been provided through the settlement. So that's something we just want to perhaps clarify and pursue the exact meaning of that with Welsh Government. I'm not sure whether that means there's no grant funding coming next year. So that is a comment that we will be pursuing, because we would like to clarify that point. This year, the settlement also provides us with indicative figures for 23-24 and 24-25. Welsh Government say they're indicative and they could change. However, it's more than we've had in the last few years. So it's 3.5% for 23-24 and 2.4% for 24-25. But I say at least we have got something at the moment for future years. And the SSA has increased by 21.45 million, or 8%. Now on the next slide, please. We have broken down the SSA. So what we can see is that I suppose if you look at the bottom line, which is the increase decrease, you can see the largest increase is in PSS, which is social services, and that's 12.51, and education, which is 7.32 as the second increase. What you will see there's a minus under capital SSA, but we'll pick that up as part of the capital report that's on the agenda. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we have now done to try to sort of update what we previously provided to Cabinet in November is we've had a look at what the potential shortfall could now be. So what we've first done is we've assumed the cost pressures remain at the same level as the report that went to Cabinet in November. However, we do appreciate that these cost pressures are going to change, and we'll talk about them on a future slide. But just to remind everybody that the net cost pressures for the authority was nearly 27 million when we were talking about all the cost pressures that are detailed in Appendix 2 to the report that you've seen, and also when we include pay awards, which would include the national insurance increase. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. So, as I say, so what we've done is we've updated the table that was shown in the November report to reflect what the actual change in the AEF is. So we've previously modelled 3.2%, which was the CPI back in September, which was would show a shortfall of 5.8 million. We then modelled the council tax to be an increase at the same level as this current year, which was 3.9%. So that is a shortfall of 5.2 million. And then we modelled the notional council tax increase going up to the projected Welsh average. That would leave a shortfall of 2.6 million. We know obviously CPI has gone up over recent months. So what we looked at was, if we looked at October's CPI and November CPI, if we did happen to put council tax up by those figures, what would be the shortfall? That ranges from just under 5 million to 4.2 million. So again, it's just giving you a feel of sort of different ranges of council tax where we would be. We just obviously wanted to point out that a 1% increase in council tax equates to an additional 841,000. Next slide, please. One of the things that we are uncertain about at the moment still is the grant funding. So we will get over the next few weeks specific grant allocations for the authority. However, some information has been provided on an all Wales level, so we can get a general feel as to if grants are increasing overall or if they're reducing. As I say, it doesn't necessarily reflect what we are going to have, but you get a sense of what the direction is going on a grant. So some of the bigger, more significant reductions are listed there. So they are, in the main, they seem to be, the larger reductions seem to be in sort of school grants. However, we've also shown some of the sort of larger increases. Again, one of those does relate to sort of schools as well. So I think we need to wait until we get the actual figures for our authorities before we can really sort of cost out and see the actual implications for us as an authority. Next slide, please. Okay, some other information that was provided was regarding the real living wage. So the Welsh Government state that the local government settlement includes funding to enable authorities to meet additional costs of starting to pay the real living wage of £9.90 per hour to social care workers from April of next year. So really, we need to do a piece of work on this. Not only will this affect us internally with our own staff, but it'll also affect external providers that we work with, because obviously we do commission a lot of services. So this is one issue that, as I said today, I can't advise you on what the implications of this, but I do need to flag up that this is a potential pressure that we haven't previously built in, but it's included in the settlement. I know you may be aware of changes in potential free school meal provisions. Again, that's mentioned in the settlement, but what it's saying is that we will be provided with a grant. It's not actually in the settlement as yet, but further information will be coming out regarding that. And we do feel we need to not only talk about the revenue, but we also need to talk about the capital implications of that as well. So again, that's something that we're waiting to get further information on. Next slide, please. And again, early years and childcare. Again, you may be aware there's been discussions about increased provision for that. So again, that's something we need to get further information on. And also we've got some notification of some across Wales, some additional capital funding across Wales for the childcare offer to support changes to these settings. But that's up to 24-25. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to sort of run through then some areas of uncertainty. So obviously in the previous report, Appendix 2 is the key that listed the cost pressures, which you'll be discussing later. But we just wanted to point out where we need further information and some uncertainties that we still have. So education demographics, in the original report, we did put a cost pressure in for that. But what we need to do now is we need to remodel that based on the new pupil numbers that have been provided. As I mentioned in a previous slide, the living wage for care workers needs to be looked at both internally and externally. Free school meal proposals, both infrastructure and revenue requirements need to be assessed. We have today received a letter from the fire service outlining what the change in our figure is going to be for next year, and that will mean cost pressure of 175,000, which we hadn't previously included in our cost pressures. Some potentially better news on our cost pressures. We had previously included a £2 million cost pressure for homelessness. So this is to fund where we have been block booking accommodation in hotels. Welsh Government have been in discussion with us and are saying that we will be able to claim in advance for block booking for next year. We do need to clarify whether this is just for the whole of the next year, whether it's for part of the year. But as I say, we have, we are in dialogue with Welsh Government, and they have said they will provide some funding for that cost pressure. So we are anticipating that £2 million cost pressure will definitely reduce. Hopefully it will go totally, but as I say, we're just getting final clarification on that. We do need to revisit the school transport cost pressure because I think there's a lot of issues in the market, and that is another item we are going to have to go back and revisit. Pay awards, there's uncertainty regarding those, so therefore that will need to be revisited. As I said, I'm not sure when we're actually going to get finalisation on that, but it is another uncertainty that we have. Again, grant funding level, as I say, we've got some idea of some overall All Wales figures where grants are going up and down, but we need to see how that actually affects us. Just finally on energy costs, again, we're still trying to quantify the impact. So we have purchased all the electricity for 22-23, so we have got a stable price on that. We have purchased 93% of our gas in advance for 22-23. So while we still have some uncertainty, hopefully it won't be as significant as it could have been if we hadn't forward purchased. So that has definitely helped us. So we're just trying to quantify the last part and what implication that will have on us. Next slide, please. Okay, so in conclusion then as to where we are with the settlement, the revenue settlement is better than in previous years, and while it is a large settlement, it does still leave us with a shortfall in funding which has to be identified. So it doesn't totally balance our budget. We still have a shortfall that the council will have to work on, and will have to identify how it's going to balance the budget. As I said, there's still some uncertainties around grant funding, and we have obviously identified cost pressures, but some of them need to be re-quantified because some of them, well, one of them we know will go down, but other ones will need to be revised. So I just want to point out as well that while where there are reserves available for us to use, they should only be used as part of an approved programme of savings to ensure that expenditure is in line with the budget on a recurring basis. As you're all aware, the reserves are there, they're one-off. Once they're spent. So they do have to be used as part of a approved programme of savings. I think that's my summary of the position of the settlement. So I know that the report also included the medium-term financial plan, but obviously some of the modelling in that, obviously I've just run through the amendments for you. And really, the next process now is I know that other committees, scrutiny committees, have had comments which they've forwarded to you. And we're at the stage really for, corporate performance to have a look at the cost pressures, how it fits with the settlement, and then your comments will be fed to Cabinet before they make the final proposals. I think hopefully that's a run through, Chair, of where we are. So if I can, happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation, Caroline, and we appreciate that. Okay, and what I want to do now is then go to members. So Mark, do you want to come in now, please?
Yeah, just
Mark.
very quick one, Chair, just to check. I've sent out to members references in relation to this agenda item from Healthy Living Environment and Regen, and also from Homes and Safe about their comments and recommendations. So hopefully everyone has had a chance to look at those and consider them. Okay, Chair.
Fine. Thank you. Okay, we're now open to members now. First member is Councillor John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the news is far, far better than what we expected. But of course, there's a long, long way to go yet before all these figures are sorted. But after attending Environment Regeneration Scrutiny meeting, we certainly came up there. Obviously, there's a number of cost pressures, but our recommendation I would put forward to you was that we recommended that waste and highway maintenance be included as a priority, as well as issues regarding health and safety. And there's one issue in Boverton where there's a wall with trees growing through it, and the wall is disintegrating. And this is on the main highway into Lantford Major, where school buses use every day. Children walk the pavement, and it is certainly one that we're all concerned about. Officers inspect this area at least twice a month to see the safety of it and how it's looking, because we're short of the cash to do anything about it. And this capital programme has been put in money for that. So I would recommend that these items be included in consideration by Cabinet. We can't have a situation on our hand where we've got danger of a bus going up that road, and possibly in heavy storms, something might go wrong. So
yeah, I think we note that, but I think I like to come in.
Forward, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, I think I'd just like to interject. I think one of your points is related to capital, which we will look at in a moment, but obviously any revenue discussions. But thank you for that anyway. Councillor Johnson, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Karen for the detailed presentation. That was very helpful. Obviously, this is a moving feast. We drew up a sort of list of our cost pressures, which is a an introductory guesstimate as to the likely situation we'll find ourselves. As we've had conversations here and in governance and audit, I'm not always sure that the way that this pans out is particularly helpful, sort of in terms of people understanding, quite what the situation is or what the final situation is likely to be. As you and as we know, those of us on this committee, these committees know, we have that midterm financial plan. We look at the amounts there. We see what the settlement says, and it's only really once you've got the settlement that you've got an idea of actually where the gap is has evolved between the cost pressures that have been identified, the amount of money that's being provided, and how we want to fill that, either by not meeting all of those cost pressures, by substantially increasing council tax to meet that gap, and obviously a lot of this will be discussed, I'm sure, for the budget working groups as we go forward over the next couple of months. I think it was helpful last time, Chair, that we had a meeting in mid-February, which was around the time of the final figures and discussing the final sort of assessments, because what we've got from Welsh Government is still their provisional settlement. There's there's a lot of question marks still there. Sorry, I get a feedback in there. Sorry, I don't know who that is. That will be that will hopefully be teased out as we go forward. For me, there's a couple of quick points here. Firstly, as you would probably expect, I do appreciate and support the proposals regarding paying the real living wage for social care, regarding the childcare offer, and regarding free school meals. I think that's all very progressive and positive things to do. However, it obviously is incumbent upon Welsh Government to ensure that we are adequately funded to do that, because we are in effect the delivery partners for decisions that have been made at a Welsh Government level. Second point is, I think it will be helpful to get a bit more information on the situation regarding the Intermediate Care Fund. because the funding regarding that is a number of our cost pressures, and that's obviously an interesting and awkward fund. I remember it when it was developed around a decade ago, and it was originally supposed to be a partnership between health boards and local governments, but over time it's gone into the health boards, coffers, and then allocated to us as a second partner, a junior partner. So interesting to know where that is. Where that's at. And the third point is about consistency of figures that we see. The presentation that was just given to us, had I think a £17.6 million increase, and the fourth biggest increase in Wales, whereas what was published yesterday by Welsh Government WLGA had a slightly higher figure, just over £18 million increase, and as the third biggest increase in Wales. And I appreciate this because I think we've probably worked out some slightly different figures to the ones that were published by WLGA and Welsh Government. But for us in analysing and understanding these things, it helps that there's consistency, and to have an understanding of why we've altered those figures, because they included things differently or calculated things differently to how we might want to propose them. But if I see a figure published on the BBC or by WLGA and it's different to the figures that we're being provided here in meetings, then that just sets up attention for how much money is actually there, and we might then miss the point of what we're really talking about. But £500,000 is £500,000, and I don't understand whether that's in our budget now or not in our budget now, because I've seen two different sets of figures. So I should appreciate an explanation on those three items. Thank you, Chair. Karen.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. That's fine. Thank you. If I start then from the beginning on scrutiny, we are planning on bringing a report back to corporate performance scrutiny. So I think what we're planning on doing is taking a report to Cabinet, then it will go on to scrutiny, and then it'll go back to Cabinet. So we are planning on having this committee involved in the final proposals. So we have got that planned. With regard to the ICF, again, it's one of those things we still haven't had sort of clarity on it. We're obviously concerned, how it's going to change, if it's changing from ICF to this transitional fund. And I know there's been talk about whether we'd have to provide some match funding. So we're still not sure about what the level of, what the level of funding is, and also secondly what we're also concerned about the criteria, because there might be something that we feel we want to fund, but perhaps the criteria has changed and we can no longer fund it. So we're waiting for clarity on that as well. So unfortunately at this point that is still up in the air, and we are hoping to receive something fairly soon on that, but it's not clear. I think about the difference with the figures is, I think what we've done is we've looked at last year's settlement and compared it to this year's settlement, but there are adjustments in the settlement. So we've tried to show, Welsh Government will say a figure, and we try to sort of do that's what it was last year, that's what it is, what we're actually going to get this year after the adjustments. So as I say, we did say that it was the adjusted figures, but if you need us to provide you with any other information on that, Councillor Johnson, we can do.
Okay, I think we got Councillor Burnett coming in now.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment. I mean, we know we've still got difficult decisions ahead of us, because obviously the settlement doesn't cover the full scale of the cost pressures that we were facing, and quite sizable levels of those cost pressures come within education. But I think if we go back to the free school meal issue, I think that's a huge step forward. I can think back to about 20 years ago when I was involved in an initiative that actually put water onto the table in every class. That wasn't actually done before that as a matter of course. And now to actually think that all our primary school children are going to have free school meals, linked to the fact, because looking at things innovatively, we're working with Welsh Government on extending the school day as a pilot in 5 of our schools, so that children can do extracurricular activities, etc., at the end of the school day. And then we've got Big Fresh that is funding after school clubs with food and healthy food for pupils as well. So we're doing a lot more innovation, and hopefully with the way forward that we're planning, we will see more innovation, more pilot projects, and hopefully when they prove to be successful, we'll be able to attract more funding for them as well. So we've got some really difficult choices to be made, but that's not going to stop us from sort of working our way forward and coming up with new ways of delivering those services.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Anyone else before I make some comments? Okay, can I thank you very much, Colin, for all the work, and also I know it's just not just you, it's the whole team on preparing these figures. I mean, there is an awful lot of work, and thank you very much for that presentation, considering you didn't have any time to turn that round. I think you've done a really good job, an excellent job on that. But there are a few points I would like to make anyway. One of the points that I am a bit concerned about, and I'm hoping it's fully funded from Westminster Government, because I've heard they said they would, and that's the McLeod judgment on pensions. As you know, we got two pension schemes, haven't we? Primarily, we've got the LGPS, and we also got the teachers' pension scheme. Now, both of these are quite have an impact upon the McLeod judgment. And basically, I just want to know, will there be any, hopefully there won't be any cost implications, but I've heard a rumour that they're going to be sorting this out in March next year. And I just wondered, perhaps, have we got any input on that? So that's the first point. The second point is in relation to going forward at all in terms of our reserves. Now, obviously, our reserves are very healthy, but they're healthy for a good purpose, in that they fund an awful lot of things that we do in terms of capital schemes. And obviously, I don't want to go to the next item, because I know we haven't got all good news on that. But nevertheless, you know, we do need to be thinking about our reserves and perhaps reprofiling them as well. And that's my other point I'm making. The third point is the uncertainty on the CPI and RPI. And if you look at RPI, it is very high. I think it's around 7%. The CPI is around 5%. Well, I think it's important, and I think we'll have a better idea in February what's the direction of travel for this, because obviously that might have an impact upon our cost pressures. So I think I'm glad that we are having another look at this in February as a committee. I mean, I think there are still lots of uncertainties before we as a committee can make any conclusions. But I would also say about other committees, it's okay if our committee suggests about priorities, but I would also like other committees to say what areas they would like to have not so important a priority. And I've heard any scrutiny committees suggesting any savings. So, you know, it's okay to say we want to spend money on this, on that, but where the savings are going to come from as well. Okay. Peter, do you want to come in on anything on what I just said or before?
If I may, it's just about the pension board. You will know that I actually sit on the Cardiff and Vale Pension Board. McLeod is going to be one of the considerations which will go into the triennial actuarial revaluation, which is due from the end of this fiscal year. I'm extremely reluctant to try and second guess any actuary who, in my opinion, makes some of the most accurate calculations based entirely upon guesswork I've ever encountered in my life. But I would dare to suggest that it is not going to be met by the government. It's going to be met by the pension fund, and that will be one of its cost pressures. The only thing that I am grateful for is that the Cardiff and Vale actuaries, who I think are Aon, have finally woken up to something that I've been banging on about for a long time, and that is we need to stop assuming that we're all going to carry on living a lot longer. If you look at the life expectancy, it climbed quite significantly for a number of years, and all the indications are that that increase is not continuing. Things are leveling out. If that comes, that would be an offset against some of the other increased liabilities, and certainly looking at the way the fund's performance has been over the past year or so, I'm very, very cautious, but I suspect the employers' contributions may not need to be substantially adjusted. But it's one of those things. They'll start the work in April, and you'll get an interim report in September, and the impact will probably not kick in until even later, unless the interim valuation suggests it needs a more urgent step. So either way, I don't think it's an immediate concern to the council from its revenue perspective.
Thank you very much for that. It's very helpful, Peter. Okay, open to any other member? Yeah, Councillor Carroll, you want to come in now?
Yes, it's I'd just like to thank Carolyn for turning the presentation and the information around as quickly as she did regarding today's draft, or yesterday's draft settlement, I should say. Hopefully that will be something, a figure of that scheme, of that size, will be the final figure that we receive. It's a point really rather than a question, just to say that 10.6% increase is to be welcomed, but I very much hope that 10.6% is passed on to council taxpayers, and that we can see that reflected in whatever rate that is set by the authority. But obviously we will have these discussions further down the line, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you all of you for making those comments, and obviously those comments are going to be passed on to Cabinet for their consideration. Okay, thank you. We're now moving on now to the initial capital proposals now. Caroline?
Is it the H?
No, I moved. I saw it's housing revenue. Apologies. My fault.
That's fine, Chair. Thank you very much. Okay, so right, so the first part of the HRA report shows the amended budget for 21-22. There's a large change from a budget of a £25,000 surplus to a deficit of 11 million. Now, the reason for this is at the end of 2021, the HRA reserve was higher than projected due to the underspend in the year. Therefore, in order to bring the level of the reserve back in line with the projected level in the business plan, there will be a need to increase revenue contributions to fund capital expenditure. And by doing this, we will be incurring additional expenditure, which will then be able to be drawn down from the HRA reserve to bring it back in line to where we wanted that to be. So as I say, so by increasing contributions to capital, we're increasing expenditure. That expenditure will be drawn down from the reserve, and it will bring down the reserve back to the level that we would like it to be. So there are other small changes as detailed in the report. There's some changes in the bad debt provision, which we have reduced. But as I say, the main change is the change to the CIRA, the contributions to capital. The report then goes on to detail the proposed budget for 22-23, which is shown in Appendix 1. And at this stage, the level of the rent increase is not yet known, as the rent policy hasn't been received from Welsh Government. So we haven't been able to sort of confirm what that position is to you tonight, but obviously that will come back at a later date with the final report. So the next stage is for committee to note the references from the Scrutiny Committee and to provide any feedback. And in line with the timetable, the final report will go to Cabinet in February and will go to the full council in March. And at the same time, the housing business plan, which will be revised, will go to Cabinet in February again and will need council approval in March. So I'm happy to take any questions on that, please, Chair.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for that. Any member? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Karen, for that report and for I think trying to for explaining the SERA, the capital expenditure from revenue account. I think I've probably got two different queries here. The first is regarding that SERA money, and the reserves in the HRA have built up quite substantially over the last 2 years. I think it jumped from about 1 million to 8 million, and then again to about 12 million.
Yes.
I think I understand the reasoning for that expenditure, and it's something that we've done in the past when those reserves have increased faster than anticipated. I'm really just getting my head around, and I suppose in some respects it's part of the earlier items as to whether that money is actually going to be spent this year, because it's built up on the basis that it hasn't been spent in the previous 2 years.
No,
my second question then is about the how we determine our provision for bad debts. We have, and that's not the amount that's been put into the HRA for that has varied over the years. I mean, a lot of times I've seen it at, I think, 1.1, 1.2 million pounds on the assumption that welfare reforms meant that people wouldn't be paying their rent in future for whatever reason. So we've now gone from 1.2 to 1.2 million to a £250,000, so a drop of £1 million between our original and amended budgets, and then we've gone for 660,000 for next year. I'm just wondering if there's any particular reason for our initial figures, or are they just finger in the air jobs on the basis of the way that welfare reform and the general socioeconomic situation heads?
Okay. Yes, so thank you, Councillor. So on the first point, at the moment, the current projected spend on the HRA as based on the November report was 31 million. So what we're now proposing is the SERA figure goes up to 18.7. So that sort of leaves some headroom there. In order to fund that 31 million, we were assuming that we'd raise loans of 8 million. So what will happen is, because we are able to make that higher contribution from revenue, what we will do is we won't raise those loans. We will raise less loans, so it means it's more beneficial to us, because then we do save on our capital charges. So that's what we will be doing, and the intention is there to do that. With regard to the provision for bad debts, when the housing business plan was drafted, for a few years we had the provision for bad debt set at 6%, and I think, as you say, that was because of the uncertainty due to welfare reforms. But what we do at this time of year is we do actually look at what is actually happening, and we revise the figure back to sort of an actual projection for the year. So that's why it has gone down. And as to whether we continue with that, I think it's paragraph 12, 2.12 of the report, what we have done for next year is we have actually looked at changing the provision for bad debt. So I'm sure that's what we're saying for next year in the report, is that we're saying instead of putting it at a 6% again, I think we're reducing it to 3%. So, as I say, it was in the business plan at 6%. We have revised it to the actual position mid-year. We are looking at revising it again next year. But I think what you have suggested is correct, that it was at those higher levels because of change in welfare reform and the uncertainties around that. If that's okay.
Fine. I haven't got any other member. Yes?
Yeah,
do you want to come back?
For the responses there. I think the one thing that would be helpful would be to be kept up to date as to whether that ceremony is actually being spent. Long-term listeners to me in budget debates will be aware that I tend to point to the reserves and ask, is that money that you've identified as being spent by 31st of March, is that actually spent? Because there's quite a substantial variation between what's presented to us as councillors in financial year and what comes to us then at governance and audit as being the final situation. And it'd be helpful to have updates on that as the year goes by.
Okay, I'll take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you. It might be good to have an update perhaps near the end of March, perhaps, on that, to make sure. So I make that recommendation anyway. Happy to support that, committee? Yeah, fine. Okay then, apart from that, we made our comments through to Cabinet on that, and I know the budget working group is going to meet subsequently before it goes to council on that. Okay, but thank you. We're now moving on. I think I'm going to get this right now. The initial capital programme.
Thank you, Chair. We've got some slides on this. If Mark could sort of pick up from where we left off.
Yeah, bear with me for a second, committee.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to say, Gemma Jones has been, who's our operational manager accountancy, has been helping me out on this one. There's quite a lot to look at since yesterday. So Gemma's going to come and help out and help chat through this actual position for us.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Mark. In terms of the general capital funding, as you'll be aware, we have had a reduction, unfortunately, in terms of general capital funding for 22-23. So in 21-22, we received 6.867 million, and for 22-23, the provisional settlement allocates 5.829 million. So this is a reduction of just over £1 million and gives us an allocated asset renewal based on the current capital programme of £1,068,000 to allocate in 22-23. The picture in terms of capital funding going forward does look slightly more positive based on the indicative figures in the settlement. So across Wales, the funding has been reduced by 16% for 22-23, but then increases to 180 million from 23-24 onwards. And there's also been a sum of 20 million set aside in 23-24 and 24-25 towards decarbonisation. So in terms of the capital bids that you'll have as part of the capital report, some of the key issues in terms of having that limited amount of funding to allocate are around resurfacing. We haven't got clarity in terms of whether there will be any additional Welsh Government resurfacing grants allocated in year, although there has been some talk about that. But obviously we need to maintain that level of resurfacing, otherwise the roads in the Vale will deteriorate. We do require significant funding in order to fund the waste scheme. So there are two capital bids at the top of the kind of priority order for the capital bid. So there's the phase 2 of the waste transfer station, and then also the waste fleet parking capital bid. And in total, we need about an extra 5 million to fund those schemes, and not progressing those schemes will have an impact on the revenue budget. So we need to think in the coming months about an accurate profile of those schemes and also how those schemes can be funded. And as you'll be aware, in the context of increasing materials costs, transport costs, and just a general increase in construction costs, we are seeing potential increased costs around 21st century schools as well. Now, we are applying to Welsh Government for additional funding where possible, but there may be some match funding required from the council as part of those schemes as well. So there are a number of risks, and if you look at the capital bids, we have a very long list of capital bids totaling 16 million. And so as Councillor John picked up, there's the capital bid around Botherton, but there are a number of capital bids that we also need to consider and see whether there are any alternative sources of funding for. Mark, are you able to go to the next slide, please? So just in terms of our next steps, really, so we have an existing capital programme. We've got a large amount of slippage into the next financial year already. I think we need to do a really robust review of profiles of capital schemes to ensure that we've got realistic timelines in terms of delivering those schemes, particularly where we're getting additional Welsh Government funding at year end as well, which will increase the capital programme for next year potentially. Making sure that we apply for additional Welsh Government funding where possible. So, for instance, for 21st century schools and for the additional zero carbon funding where possible. looking at to use reserves, capital receipts and any other funding, and also thinking about whether some of those schemes that we want to progress could be achieved in 23-24 or 24-25 when there's potential additional funding available for the council as well. Okay, so I'll hand back to Carolyn so she can pick up the other elements of the report.
Okay, thank you, Gemma. So really, it's just, as I say, it is on capital a sort of slightly worse position than we had anticipated. We already have, I think it's in Appendix 1 to the report, we already have some schemes that we sort of always tend to build in, and we have approved for several years, such as some asset renewal, there's some resurfacing, there's some DFGs. So they are sort of our regular items that are always in the capital programme. But Appendix 2 to the report then shows the sort of new bids that have been received over and above. So just really to hand over if anyone's got any questions regarding the report and the revised settlement.
Again, thank you very much, and thank you very much to both of you for turning this report around very quickly, especially the presentation. Open to members. Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was going to leave and see if anybody else wanted to comment first, rather than me jumping in all the time. But I did give some sort of advance notice to Carolyn that I was interested in the Plethy, can't think of it in English, the sort of the linkage between the Welsh in Education Strategic Programme and the Capital Programme. The council is, I know obviously the cabinet member is present at the moment, but the council has just finished consulting on the West, which is a 10-year programme that runs from next year until 2031, 2031, yes. Obviously, this is a 5-year programme of capital works. So I'm just interested to obviously Band B coming to an end for 21st century schools. I was interested in how we are going to manage segue from those Band B schools into the capital requirements that are going to come out of the West, and where is that likely to fit in timescales? When is how is that going to operate? I'm particularly thinking about Cowbridge and Darren Farm development, and also take into consideration the comments from both the cabinet member and the managing director, chief executive, earlier on today about ownership of these schemes. So I'm just thinking how that's going to actually be worked into this programme as we go forward. Thank you, Chair. Karen.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I can't comment specifically on the individual schools. I mean, what I can do is come back with you with a sort of a bit more written statement in more detail. I mean, just to say though that Welsh placements are considered. They will be part, and they are part of developing the programme going forward. Where there's a need as part of the 21st century schools programme, and going forward they will be included. I'd say I'm not able to provide any comments specifically on Cowbridge and Darren Farm, but I am happy to go back and get something specific to you over and above what was emailed out on that particular proposal and that particular area of the Vale, if you'd like.
See, I'm happy, but I think the cabinet member wants to.
Yeah, I was going to get the cabinet member.
I was just going to say. I mean, I think what I'm interested here is that we. It's those sort of outer edges of this. We have a 5-year plan here, but actually there's not very much in once you get to years 4 and 5. Whereas we're also consulting on a 10-year proposal. So it's how best to manage those longer term considerations. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I'll bring the cabinet member for education and deputy leader Liz for that.
Thanks, Chair. I think I'd like to reassure Councillor Johnson that, I mean, there are a wide range of considerations obviously we have to look at in developing plans for the future, not least the criteria that are going to be handed down to us from Welsh Government. I know when I was having a conversation with the minister recently, one of the things that he was talking about is, do we, particularly within the climate change environment, do we stick with rebuilding, or do we actually look at remodeling, retrofitting, etc., existing schools? But we have to also look at capacity. We have to look at strategies such as the Welsh in Education strategy and how we build capacity for that. We also have to look where schools are potentially built with part or full Section 106 funding, where those developments come online. The reason why an awful lot of our schools have been built at the first part of the 21st Century Schools Band B programme is that we very much got ahead of the game. I mean, in virtually every band of 21st Century Schools, we have delivered the first school. The first school opened within those bands has been in the Vale of Glamorgan. The first school zero carbon in use is in the Vale of Glamorgan. So we've got scope to be looking at what we're doing more towards the end of the band, should there be finance available. And we continue to talk to Welsh Government about those. And I am reassured we have got a stunningly good team in 21st Century Schools who really are driving forward the education needs at the Vale of Glamorgan. I'm hoping, I know that they're doing a lot of considerations about what could fit here, what could fit there, but in a lot of ways we're going to have to wait and see what intervention rates are, etc., with Welsh Government to see how the jigsaw fits together. But I would be hoping as soon as possible. Whether that will be, in the next couple of months, I don't know. A lot depends on Welsh Government, but I would certainly be hoping to be able to communicate some detail on that in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much. Okay. Are you happy with that response, Councillor Johnson? Yeah. Councillor John now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies for getting my paperwork mixed up earlier.
That's fine.
However, I would like to thank the officers for their report. Excellent. And I would like to reiterate recommendations from Environment Regeneration Committee, recommendations to the committee tonight. All of those recommendations were discussed in depth and are certainly urgent. I would suggest that possibly either councillor, maybe the cabinet basically, may like to pay a visit to Poverton Road and satisfy themselves first before they make any recommendations. Maybe Councillor Williams could feed them with some photographs. That might be a help. But I'd hate to think that we bypassed the situation and then regretted it later. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you for that. Open to any other member? I'd just like to say that obviously, we would always like to have lots of schemes on capital, but given the seriousness and given that £1 million cut in funding on this at the moment for most government, it is a concern. And obviously we may have to reprofile certain capital schemes over more years, perhaps going forward, to get them back onto the programme. But also, perhaps, maybe we need to look at some of our rules regarding procurement as well. Could be an area where we could make some savings. Obviously, we've got to comply with procurement rules, which I know can be quite inflexible at times. But nevertheless, it's something we could possibly look at as well as obviously, we could look at funding it through other ways of funding it. But again, we only have reserves for so many things, for so many purposes. And also, if you start going through borrowing, we still have to pay it back. And, and that's something that we do need to think about as well. But I think there are things like obviously road surfacing and pavements where there is some form of cost initially, but there's a benefit in the longer term in terms of saving money on maintenance. So, there are areas where perhaps we could look at going forward on that. But also the other area is the waste transfer station in Penarth. Again, that is a cost, but there is savings by having that waste transfer station in terms of having less penalties if we don't hit our recycling target. So clearly there are areas where we could look at that. And those are sort of my comments. I don't know if committee wants to echo what I just said there and agree with those comments. Obviously, if you don't want to, please let me know. But I'm hoping that the committee kind of agrees with what I'm saying. But what I'm looking at is like the costs and the benefits of those programs going forward. Okay, I think I got a few nods and a few thumbs ups. Okay, so thank you for that. Okay, and I think we're going to have another bite of the same cherry again on this, and it's going to go back to us after it goes to cabinet in February at the same time. Okay, I'm going to wish everyone. Okay, I got no other item on the agenda.
Sorry, Chair,
everyone,
can I
yes.
just double check in terms of recommendations for this report now? Are we obviously, like the others, saying that we'll be passing on certain comments, including your comments now, Chair, to the Cabinet?
Correct.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, and can I thank everyone for attending this meeting? Can I wish everyone a happy Christmas and, more importantly, a safe one as well? And you know, take care, everybody. And I wish everyone a happy new year, and I'll see you all in 2022. I can't believe we're talking about 2022. All right. Okay. No one can really, can we? All right. And thank you all. And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Chairman.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Everybody. Your backdrop.
Good night.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Look forward to a brighter 22.
I think we all do. Fingers crossed. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Chair, can I